Too poor. It wasn't yelled. It wasn't dramatic. It was just 2 words, soft, careless, cruel. And yet it hit like a slap. I remember that moment like a freeze frame. The world seemed to stop breathing. Sarah Bennett, 35 years old, wearing a faded white t-shirt, worn-out jeans, and scuffed Converse, stepped into Boston Luxury Motors with nothing but quiet confidence and a hopeful smile. Not the kind of smile that asks for attention. The kind that says I'm here for someone I love. She wasn't looking to impress anyone. She was looking for a gift for her sister Cassie, who had just survived cancer. But Blake Thompson, the sales manager perched behind a glossy mahogany desk like he owned the air in the room, didn't care about that. When Sarah pointed toward the deep midnight blue coupe near the showroom window, the one bathed in soft museum-grade lighting, Blake barely glanced up. He smirked, and then, without blinking, too poor. The words landed like a dart in the center of a quiet room. A hush fell. A couple sipping coffee paused mid-sip. One junior employee, barely out of college, froze with a water glass halfway to the tray. Sarah didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't beg. She simply nodded. Then she turned and walked out gracefully like the insult had passed through her without leaving a mark. But here's the truth, it did leave a mark. Just not the kind Blake expected. What happened next would make that entire dealership confront the one thing money can't buy: dignity. Closing hook. Have you ever been judged by what you wore? Stick around, because this story flips the script in a way no one saw coming. Scene title: The Woman They Never Saw Coming. The morning air still smelled like a autumn sharp, clean, full of change. Sarah drove in silence. Her old Camry hummed down Tremont Street, its worn engine no match for the gleaming machine she'd just walked away from. But her grip on the steering wheel was steady, her eyes clear, focused. She wasn't hurt, not really. What she felt was clarity. Cassie always said she never wanted anything fancy. Just a road trip, she used to whisper, hooked up to machines in that quiet cancer ward, her voice thin as paper. Just you, me. A map and a car with windows big enough to see the world passing by. That was the dream, and that's why Sarah had walked into Boston Luxury Motors that morning. Not to impress anyone, not to prove anything, but to say thank you with a car. Something sleek, smooth, and blue like the Pacific coast they'd always wanted to see. She had the money. She had the heart. What she didn't have, apparently, was the look. That dealership, though, it had a performance to it. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. The smell of polished leather and espresso beans filled the air. Salesmen wore Italian loafers like uniforms. Customers didn't walk, they floated holding lattes in one hand and status in the other. Sarah had walked in like a misstep in their choreography. And Blake, he didn't see a woman with a story. He saw a threat to his aesthetic. His job wasn't just to sell cars, it was to protect the brand. And that brand didn't wear cotton tees and scuffed sneakers. But not everyone in the showroom shared Blake's blind spots. Ethan Miller, 22, was just a junior sales rep new enough to still believe kindness wasn't bad for business. He'd seen Sarah, really seen her. He noticed the way she walked slowly past, each coupe fingers grazing the edge of a headlight like she was reading Braille. He watched her pause in front of the midnight blue model just for a second like she'd found something sacred. And when Blake dropped that line, too poor, Ethan felt something twist in his chest. He started to step forward, a water bottle in hand, but Sarah was already turning to leave. He hesitated, then followed her out, catching up as she opened her driver's side door. "Ma'am," he said softly. She turned. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. That shouldn't have happened." Sarah looked at him, surprised. "You did nothing wrong," she replied. "I know," Ethan admitted, "but still, you deserved better." She smiled, a soft, knowing smile, the kind that says I've lived long enough to not hold everyone responsible for one person's ignorance. Then she added, "You're young. Keep that heart. Don't trade it for a suit." And with that, she got into her car and drove away. Inside, Blake watched from the window. He scoffed, turning to his colleague. "Waste of a showroom visit. Some people just can't accept their lane." Richard Mason, The general manager chuckled without looking up from his iPad. "Don't worry, that kind doesn't come back." But Sarah did come back. Just not the way they expected. That evening, she sat across from James at their quiet kitchen table. He was reading the paper. She was stirring tea. "They told me I was too poor," she said suddenly, like she was talking about the weather. James looked up, eyebrows raised. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. Instead, he reached into a drawer, pulled out his keys, and said simply, "Tomorrow morning, we go together." Sarah tilted her head. "To prove a point." "No," James said, "to remind them who they're really serving." The next morning, a Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up to Boston Luxury Motors. It wasn't anger that stepped out of that car, it was intention, wrapped in tailored silence, and backed by a name no one expected. It was 9:07 a.m. when the Rolls-Royce Phantom slid to a stop in front of Boston Luxury Motors. Not screeched, not roared, just arrived quiet, clean, unbothered, like it belonged there before the building even existed. Inside the dealership, Blake was leaning against a desk sipping his almond milk latte and laughing at some joke only people with expensive watches pretend to understand. The double doors opened, and the laughter stopped. Every eye turned as a tall man stepped in. Dark navy coat, black cashmere turtleneck, not a single label in sight, but everything about him whispered influence. His name, James Bennett. But in that room, no one recognized it yet. Ethan did. His breath caught. He'd seen James before on the cover of TechSite Weekly in a Forbes article titled "The Billionaire No One Can Find." James didn't look angry. He looked surgical. His gaze swept the room like a scanner until it landed on Blake. "I'm looking for Blake Thompson," he said calmly. Blake stepped forward with the salesman's smile he wore like a mask. "That's me. Can I help you?" Sir James pulled a small velvet folder from his coat and placed it on the table. "I believe you met my wife yesterday. Sarah Bennett." Blake blinked. Twice. "Wait, what?" my wife James repeated. "She came in a white t-shirt. Asked about a midnight blue coupe. You told her she was too poor." There it was. The color drained from Blake's face. Richard Mason, overhearing the name Bennett, finally stood and approached. "Sir, there must be some confusion." James turned. "Is there?" he asked, voice cool as glass. "Because your cameras should confirm everything. The timestamp was 9:43 a.m. yesterday. She came in alone. Left alone. But not unnoticed." He paused. "And not forgotten." Ethan stepped forward from the sidelines, clearly shaken. "Mr. Bennett, I just wanted to say your wife was nothing but kind. I tried to help. I really did." James offered a subtle nod. "You did. That's why I requested you personally." Blake looked between them, heart pounding. Requested for what James didn't answer right away. Instead, the showroom doors opened again, and this time it was Sarah who walked in, wearing the same white t-shirt, same jeans, same quiet dignity. Only now the sunlight behind her made her look like the calm before a storm. The room went still. Blake's jaw tightened. Richard adjusted his collar. No one said a word, until Sarah did. "I came back," she said gently, "because my sister deserves that coupe, not because of what you said, but in spite of it." Her voice was calm, but her eyes sharp as truth. "My sister's name is Cassie. She's been battling cancer for the past year. That car was supposed to be her birthday gift, the first real celebration we've had in 2 years." She stepped closer. "But yesterday I was told I didn't belong, because I didn't look like money." A hush spread like spilled ink. "I didn't tell you who I was," she continued, "because I wanted to be treated like anyone else, not as James Bennett's wife, not as the founder of a foundation, just a woman who came in with a dream." James placed a firm hand on her back. She didn't lean into it. She didn't need to. She was standing just fine on her own. Richard cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "We sincerely apologize, Mrs. Bennett. This is not representative of our values." Sarah looked at him. That's the thing she said quietly. It is. Blake swallowed hard. I'm not here to humiliate anyone, she added, but I am here to choose who gets my business and who doesn't. She turned to Ethan. You were the only one who looked me in the eye. That's why I'd like you to complete the sale. Full commission. No discounts. Ethan's eyes widened. His voice cracked. Yes, ma'am. James looked at Blake, then back at Sarah. And one more thing, Sarah said. She pulled out a cream-colored envelope and handed it to Blake. It was an invitation to the upcoming Bennett Foundation Gala for Children with Disabilities. Dress code, casual. Role volunteer. Blake stared at the envelope like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and for the first time in his career, he didn't know what to say. But Sarah wasn't done teaching, and the next lesson wouldn't happen in a showroom. It would happen among children who had survived more than humiliation. Scene title: Mirrors Don't Lie. The envelope sat untouched on Blake's desk for over a day. Not because he forgot, but because he couldn't bring himself to open it. Volunteering. At a gala for disabled children. It sounded like a punishment dressed in virtue. And that's exactly what made it worse, because deep down, Blake knew it wasn't a punishment. It was a test. One that had nothing to do with selling cars and everything to do with confronting himself. Back at Boston, Luxury Motors, the fallout had already begun. Richard Mason called for an internal review. Not because his conscience woke up, but because the board of directors had. James Bennett didn't threaten legal action. He didn't demand heads roll. He did something far more devastating. He quietly leaked the security footage. A 48-second clip showing Sarah Humble, quietly hopeful, being waved off with a smirk and 2 words, too poor. It went viral in 3 hours. Not because Sarah made it public, because one of the interns who'd heard the laughter that day did. The caption, "She walked in with dignity. They tried to price her out of it." Within 24 hours, Boston Luxury Motors Instagram was flooded with comments. Some shared their own stories. Some asked if Ethan still worked there. Many asked if Blake had been fired. Richard tried damage control. He posted a polished video in front of a white luxury sedan. We at Boston Luxury Motors pride ourselves on respect, inclusion, and excellence. The comments roasted him alive. Where was that respect yesterday? You guys sell cars, not character. Too late. We saw the clip. Ethan, meanwhile, stayed quiet. He kept showing up, helping customers. Not for praise, just to work. But everyone started noticing him. And for the first time, Blake noticed him too. 3 days later, Richard called Blake into his office. Corporate wants statements from everyone who interacted with Mrs. Bennett, he said flatly. I didn't know who she was, Blake muttered. Exactly, Richard snapped. That's the problem. There was a pause. Long, cold. Then Richard added, You're lucky they're not suing. You're also lucky she chose compassion over publicity. But if you want to stay here, you're going to that gala. Blake stiffened. I don't know the first thing about working with kids, especially kids with... He trailed off, unsure how to end the sentence without sounding worse. Richard didn't flinch. You'll figure it out, or someone else will be doing your job by Monday. That night, Blake sat alone in his condo staring at the invitation. Cream envelope. Embossed gold print. It wasn't flashy, just elegant, honest. On the back, handwritten in blue ink, were 4 words. Let the heart lead. Sarah B. Meanwhile, James and Sarah were wrapping up logistics for the gala. I didn't expect him to accept, Sarah admitted, organizing name tags. He's not doing it for us, James replied. He's doing it for his job. Sarah smiled faintly. That's enough to get him in the room. The rest, we'll leave to the kids. James paused, then said gently, Are you ready to be seen? That question lingered. Sarah had spent most of her life behind curtains, letting the foundation take credit while she stood quietly off stage. But now, the curtain had been pulled open, and not by her. She looked up at James, her eyes steady. Yes, she said, not for me. For Cassie. For the children. For the ones who are told they're too poor, too broken, too different to matter. The night before the gala, Blake couldn't sleep. He pulled out an old shoebox from his closet. Inside a faded Polaroid of himself at age 7 standing next to his mother outside their rundown trailer in South Carolina. She'd worked 3 jobs. He'd worn hand-me-downs. He stared at the photo, and for the first time in years remembered who he used to be. Not the man in Italian shoes, but the boy in dusty sneakers who once felt less than enough. The next evening, under string lights and soft jazz, Blake arrived at the Bennett Foundation Gala. Not as a manager, not as a salesman, but as a man trying maybe for the first time to listen, and what he would hear would change more than just his resume. Scene title: What Kindness Reveals. Blake Thompson stood at the edge of the Bennett Foundation Gala wearing khaki chinos and a navy polo with a name tag that read simply Blake, volunteer. No job title, no company. Just his name in blocky font pinned slightly crooked on his chest. The event was nothing like he expected. There was no red carpet, no velvet ropes, no staged photo ops. Instead, it was held in an old renovated train station, the brick walls strung with warm cafe lights. The air filled with the soft hum of laughter, the sound of wheelchairs rolling on hardwood, and the smell of homemade cookies. Children zipped between adults, some on crutches, some with oxygen tanks, some carried gently in their parents' arms. None of them shy, all of them shining. And standing in the middle of it all was Sarah. Blake watched her from a distance as she knelt beside a girl with a prosthetic leg adjusting the height of a microphone for her speech. Sarah didn't give orders, she didn't demand credit. She moved like someone who belonged in the background, and yet everyone naturally looked to her. It was quiet leadership, and it unnerved him. Ethan spotted Blake across the room and waved. "Glad you came." Blake tried to smile. "Yeah, well, let's get to work." They spent the next 2 hours handing out drinks, helping with seating, directing guests, and lifting wheelchairs over a few stubborn thresholds. Then came the photo booth. Blake had just finished posing with a boy named Jeremiah who had spinal muscular atrophy and the brightest dimples Blake had ever seen. As he helped Jeremiah back to his chair, the boy tugged his sleeve. Mr. Jeremiah asked, "Are you the guy who told Miss Sarah she didn't belong?" Blake froze. He looked down at Jeremiah's honest round eyes. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I was." The boy tilted his head. "But you're nice now." Blake chuckled, heart-stinging. "Trying to be." Jeremiah grinned. "That's good. She said people can change, but only if they want to." Nearby, Ethan was chatting with a woman in a red scarf. Her voice was low but urgent. "She's the one," Ethan said softly when Blake joined them. "Cassie, Sarah's sister." Cassie turned to Blake. "I heard what happened, what you said to her." Blake braced himself. "But she didn't attack. She simply said I was once told I was too broken to live past 30. I'm 38 now." Then she smiled slow, deliberate. "And I'm riding home tonight in a midnight blue coupe, so thank you." Blake stood speechless. Every sentence from these women hit harder than any headline ever could. Later that evening, Sarah took the stage to thank the volunteers. Her speech wasn't flashy, it was full of stories, of kids in need and of those who stepped up when it mattered. Then her voice softened. "There was a moment last week," she said, "when I was told I wasn't the right kind of person to walk into a showroom." A few heads turned toward Blake. He didn't hide, but that moment, she continued, led to another one. When that same person showed up here, willing to serve. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. Gasps. A few soft claps. Sarah's eyes met Blake's, not cold, not triumphant, just steady. And that she finished is what this night is about: who we become when no one's watching. Who we decide to be after the first mistake. The room erupted into applause. After the event, Blake helped stack chairs. No one asked him to, he just didn't want to leave. Ethan clapped him on the back. "You good." Blake looked around the now empty room. For the first time in a long time, "Yeah." Then he pulled out his phone. On it was the photo from the booth, him and Jeremiah both grinning like old friends. He tapped post on Instagram, wrote just one caption. "This little guy taught me more in one night than I've learned in years. Dignity isn't a product. It's a choice." The next day, Sarah got a call from Richard Mason. The dealership was hemorrhaging customers. The board was demanding change. And this time, it was her voice they wanted to hear. Scene title: The quiet storm rolls in. 3 days after the gala, Boston Luxury Motors didn't look quite so shiny. Outside, protest signs leaned against brick walls. Character over commission. Not just what you sell, but who you are. Would you tell her she's too poor again? Inside, the mood was no better. Richard Mason sat stiffly behind his desk, scrolling through the dealership's plummeting reviews. 24 cancellations. 3 luxury clients pulling future orders. The damage wasn't financial, it was reputational. And in this industry, that was worse. Blake stood beside the window, arms crossed. Not defiant, reflective. The truth, he wasn't sure why he was still there. Then the front door chimed, and in walked Sarah Bennett. Again. But this time she wasn't alone. James followed behind, calm as ever, and trailing them 2 board members of the national dealership chain that owned Boston Luxury Motors. Richard stood instantly. "Mrs. Bennett, Mr. Bennett, I didn't expect—" "You should have—" James interrupted. "We gave you 3 days." They gathered in the main showroom. No jazz music this time, no soft lighting to cushion the tension. Just people. Real people. Ethan stood quietly behind the front desk. A few junior staff members hovered nervously in the corners. Even a few customers browsing when Sarah entered decided to stay. Sarah turned toward Richard and Blake. "I'm not here for an apology," she said. Voice steady. "We already received one." In the form of silence. In the form of deleted comments and deflected questions. Richard cleared his throat. "We've already launched internal training." "And yet your top sales manager is still here," James said, glancing toward Blake. Blake didn't flinch. "I am," he said, "but I'm not the same man you met last week." He stepped forward, facing Sarah directly. "You don't owe me forgiveness, but I owe you honesty." He paused. "I used to think I knew who deserved luxury. I thought it came with suits and status and smooth credit, but what I saw at that gala," he looked around, "made me realize I've been selling the wrong thing all these years. I've been selling symbols, not service." Sarah listened. No expression, no rescue. "I'll step down," Blake added quietly, "if that's what you want." There was a beat of silence. Then Sarah looked to the 2 board members. "It's not about removing one man," she said. "It's about changing the mirror this place holds up to the people who walk in." She reached into her bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. A printed initiative. The Bennett Standards of Service. Respect first. Identity blind. Value driven. A model designed not just for showrooms but for human dignity. "I'm offering this," she said, placing it on the table, "not as punishment, but as partnership." The younger board member, a woman in a red blazer, stepped forward. "We've reviewed your proposal, and we agree. Boston Luxury Motors will adopt the Bennett standards across all 10 of our flagship stores. Starting here." Gasps. A few claps. One staff member blinked in disbelief. Richard looked cornered, and the staff, James, raised an eyebrow. "Will be retrained by people who understand more than luxury, people who understand people." He turned to Ethan. "We'd like you to lead the pilot program." Ethan nearly dropped his clipboard. "Me?" Sarah smiled. "You didn't just see me that day, Ethan. You valued me. That's leadership." Blake stepped back, nodding, humbled. "Looks like you're the new face of the floor," he said to Ethan. Ethan turned red. "Only if you stick around to help." That caught Sarah by surprise. Blake chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "If you'll let me, I'd like to earn back something that matters more than any sale trust." Sarah looked at him. Really looked at him. And then nodded. 1 shift a week, she said. In the showroom, with a name tag. No title. Blake grinned. That's more than fair. As Sarah and James walked back to the Rolls-Royce, the protest signs outside had turned into selfie requests. Customers stopped to thank her. One woman with a stroller whispered, "You made us all feel seen." Sarah only smiled, squeezing James's hand as they reached the car. "Think they'll really change?" he asked. She looked back toward the dealership. They already are. But the story didn't end there, because 1 month later, something unexpected happened. And Sarah would be the one invited back not as a customer, but as a keynote speaker. Scene. Title. The showroom looks different now. 1 month later, the lobby of Boston Luxury Motors felt quieter. Not in sound, in energy. Gone were the smug glances, the thin smiles, the assumption that wealth looked a certain way. In their place, curiosity, warmth, eye contact. At the center of it all stood Ethan Miller, no longer junior anything. His new title, printed on a brushed steel plaque at the entrance, read Client Experience Director. But even Ethan didn't act like a boss. He greeted everyone who walked in like a guest at his own home. And this morning he was waiting outside with a clipboard and a grin because today was special. The luxury dealership was about to host something it had never hosted before, a community town hall, a real one. Organized by the Bennett Foundation. Chaired by Sarah Bennett herself. Topic: redefining service in a status-obsessed industry. Sarah pulled into the lot, not in a Rolls-Royce, but in a clean, unbranded electric sedan. She stepped out in her usual white t-shirt, this time paired with a simple gray blazer. Her only accessory, a lanyard reading Guest Speaker, Community Partner. Ethan met her at the curb. "You ready?" Sarah smiled. "I'm not here to impress, just here to tell the truth." Inside, the showroom had been rearranged. No longer a stage for product placement, it now looked like a TED Talk in a community center. Foldable chairs, fresh coffee, a podium placed just beside the midnight blue coupe she never got to test drive. It wasn't just symbolic, it was earned. Blake arrived shortly after. Not late, not overdressed, just present. He wore khakis, a button-up with rolled sleeves, and, true to Sarah's terms, a simple name tag, Blake, Learning Staff. He'd kept his promise. 1 shift a week. No title, no commission, just conversations. And, strangely, he liked it. When Sarah stepped to the podium, the room hushed. Not because she demanded it, but because something about her presence made people want to listen. She cleared her throat, looked around, and said, "I walked into this building 2 months ago and was told I didn't belong, that I wasn't the right type for a car like that." A few heads lowered. Blake's among them. "But here's the twist," she continued. "I was never angry. I was disappointed." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Because this building doesn't just sell cars. It sells status, and for too long status has been confused with value." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. Sarah gestured toward the midnight blue coupe. "I didn't come back to shame anyone. I came back to help build a place where no one has to prove they deserve kindness. Applause, not loud, but honest." After the talk, a panel discussion followed. Questions from the audience, testimonials from customers. Even Richard Mason, after resigning his GM position, attended quietly, sitting in the back, nodding. The highlight came when Ethan announced the launch of a national training module based on the Bennett standards co-developed with the foundation. It would be rolled out across 5 cities in the next year. Then, Ethan invited Sarah to join the Board of Ethics and Service for the dealership network. She declined the seat, but offered something better. "I'd rather be your conscience than your committee member," she said with a wink. Everyone laughed, including Blake. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Sarah sat beside the coupe for the first time. Ethan walked up and tossed her a set of keys. "It's yours. No gimmicks, no discounts. Just from all of us." Sarah stared at the keys. "I didn't do this for the car," she said softly. I know, Ethan replied. That's why you're the only one who deserves it. She opened the driver's side door, ran her hand along the leather, and for a moment, just a moment, she let herself feel it. Not the luxury, the justice. That night she drove to Cassie's house. The coupe purred down the quiet street, gliding like a whisper. Cassie opened the front door in slippers and a bandana, blinking at the car. You didn't. I did, Sarah said, holding up the keys. Cassie's eyes filled. Is this the one? Sarah nodded. The one they said we didn't deserve. Cassie stepped into the passenger seat, ran her fingers across the dashboard, then whispered, Let's go, somewhere far. Sarah smiled. Anywhere you want. And with that, the midnight blue coupe disappeared into the twilight carrying two women who were never too poor for anything. Except maybe the world's expectations. But this story wasn't just about redemption. It was about redefining worth. And the final words would come from the one person who knew it all along. Scene title: She was never too poor. We were just too blind. The sun was setting when the coupe stopped by a quiet cliffside near the coast. Sarah and Cassie sat in silence watching waves crash far below two sisters in a car once used to measure their worth, now simply a vehicle for joy. Cassie turned to her, resting her chin on the headrest. You know, she said softly, you never told me what he actually said to you that day. Sarah looked out the window, smile fading for a moment. He looked me up and down, and then he said, Too poor. She let the words linger as if finally setting them down, and for a second, I almost believed him. Cassie nodded. And now Sarah turned her voice low but unwavering. Now I know he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to the version of value he was taught to worship. She exhaled. And I don't need to correct him. Life already did. Back in Boston, the video of Sarah's final speech circulated quietly but powerfully. No viral stunts, no outrage clickbait, just truth. Tens of thousands shared it. Comments poured in. This made me cry. I felt invisible walking into places like that. I hope my daughter grows up to be like her. It's not about revenge. It's about reminding people what decency looks like. The story became more than a headline. It became a mirror. Somewhere in a different city, a young woman walks into a showroom wearing old jeans and a soft smile. The salesman hesitates, then steps forward with respect, not judgment. Because someone somewhere remembered Sarah Bennett. Voice over close. We spend so much time assigning value to others by what they wear, drive, or earn. But the truth is the richest people are often the quietest in the room. And the loudest lessons come from those who don't shout. Call to action. Have you ever been judged by how you look, told you weren't enough? Or maybe you were the one who made that judgment. Either way, this is your chance to flip the script. Share your story in the comments. Who do you see differently now? What does value mean to you after hearing Sarah's? Because dignity isn't a brand, it's a decision, and someone out there is waiting for you to make it. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.